They didn't sell her because she was beautiful. They sold her because she was broken. In their world, a woman's worth is measured in sons, and her doctor had just handed her father the ultimate depreciation notice. Barren. She was useless for alliances. So, her parents put a price tag on her head and tossed her to the wolves to settle a debt. But the wolf who bought her didn't want an heir. He already had 4. He just needed a mother. The word hung in the sterile, heavily air-conditioned clinic. Inhospitable. That was the adjective Dr. Aris chose. Not infertile. Not barren. Inhospitable. Like she was a cheap motel with flickering neon signage that no respectable traveler would dare check into. Nora sat on the edge of the examination table, the paper crinkling under her thighs. The paper gown felt like sandpaper against her skin. She didn't look at the ultrasound images frozen on the monitor. She looked at the back of her father's neck. Richard Hayes didn't flinch. He didn't turn to offer her a comforting glance. His jaw tightened, the muscles ticking just beneath his collar. 0%? Richard asked. His voice was flat. Business. Without a miracle, yes, Dr. Aris said, shifting uncomfortably in his leather chair. He knew who her father was. Everyone in this part of Chicago knew who the Hayes family was, and more importantly, who they owed. The scarring is extensive, given the lack of intervention over the last decade. Thank you, doctor, Richard interrupted, standing up. He buttoned his suit jacket. We're done here. Nora, get dressed. He walked out without looking back. Her mother, Diane, who had been sitting in the corner scrolling through her phone, finally looked up. She didn't look sad. She looked inconvenienced. She dropped her phone into her designer bag, sighed, and followed her husband out the door. Nora was 26. In the syndicate, a 26-year-old unmarried woman was already pushing expiration. A 26-year-old unmarried woman who couldn't breed was garbage. She dressed slowly. Pulling her silk blouse over her shoulders, she felt a strange, hollow sensation in her chest. Not grief. Relief, maybe. She would never have to hand a child over to this life. She would never have to watch a son learn how to load a Glock at 10, or watch a daughter learn how to smile while older, dangerous men looked her up and down. The curse was a shield. But she underestimated her father's pragmatism. When she got to the car, the tinted partition separating them from the driver was already up. Richard was pouring himself a scotch from the built-in bar. Diane was smoking, the window cracked just enough to suck the gray tendrils out into the winter air. The Romanos won't take the contract now, Richard said, staring into his amber glass. Carmine wanted a grandson. He made that very clear. We owe them $3 million, Richard, Diane said, her voice raspy. If we don't give them Nora, they take the docks. If they take the docks, we are out on the street. I am aware of the math, Diane. He finally looked at Nora. His eyes were the color of old concrete, cold, utilitarian. You held out on us. You knew about the pain. You didn't tell us it was this bad. I told you when I was 16, Nora replied, her voice steady. She had learned long ago that tears were blood in the water. You told me to take an Advil and stop whining. Don't get smart. Richard downed the scotch. You're a defective asset, Nora, but you're still an asset. We just have to pivot the marketing. Marketing? Nora echoed. There are men who don't care about kids, Diane said, exhaling smoke. She looked at her daughter the way one looks at a scratched car before trading it in. Men who just want a pretty thing to warm their beds, host their dinners, and keep her mouth shut. They won't pay what the Romanos were going to pay for a bloodline, but we can piece it together. Nora stared at them. You're going to auction me. We're going to broker an arrangement, Richard corrected, though it was the same thing. Tonight, at the Continental, wear the black velvet dress, the one with the plunge. They didn't give her time to process the death of her future. They gave her 5 hours to paint her face, strap herself into 4-inch heels, and walk into a subterranean cigar lounge filled with the worst men in the Midwest. The Continental was a neutral zone. Thick velvet curtains, mahogany panels, the oppressive stench of expensive tobacco, and cheap morals. Nora sat in a high-backed leather booth, sipping sparkling water, playing the part of the silent, obedient doll. Her father worked the room. She watched him approach underbosses, loan sharks, and disgraced politicians. He was pitching her. She could see the exact moment he disclosed her condition. The men would look over at her. Some sneered, some smiled, a slow, predatory curvature of the lips. A woman who couldn't get pregnant meant no messy complications, no leverage. A man with a scar running through his left eyebrow walked over. He smelled of garlic, sweat, and cheap cologne. He slid into the booth across from her. He didn't introduce himself. He just looked at her chest, then her eyes. Richard says you can't have kids, the man grunted. That is the medical consensus, yes, Nora said, her voice deadpan. He leaned in. I like that. Means I can do whatever I want, and I don't have to worry about paying for a bastard. Nora's stomach turned over, a slow, sickening roll, but her face remained a mask of porcelain. This was her life now. She was going to be sold to a monster to pay for her father's failed gambling rings and sinking ships. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, just to block out his leering face. When she opened them, the man with the scar was gone. Someone had grabbed him by the back of his collar and hauled him out of the booth. The man who took his place didn't slide into the booth. He stood beside it, looming over the table like a storm front. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that looked like armor. His dark hair was threaded with premature silver at the temples, and his eyes were dark, exhausted, and terrifyingly sharp. There was blood on his left cuff, a small, rust-colored smear on the crisp white cotton. He didn't look at her with lust. He looked at her with calculation. "Arthur Costa!" a voice gasped from the floor. The scarred man was scrambling backward, clutching his throat. I didn't know you had a claim on her." "I don't," the man, Arthur, said. His voice was a low, gravelly baritone that vibrated over the ambient jazz of the lounge. "But you're ruining the view, Benny. Walk away." Benny didn't need to be told twice. He vanished into the crowd. Arthur Costa. Nora knew the name. Everyone did. He was the head of the Costa family, a ruthless faction that controlled the northern supply lines. He was a widower. His wife had died in a car bombing 3 years ago, a hit meant for him. Rumor was he had butchered the men responsible with his bare hands. He sat down across from her. He moved with a heavy, bone-deep weariness. He signaled a waiter with 2 fingers, not even looking up. "Bourbon, neat." He turned his dark gaze on her. Nora held it. She didn't shrink back. What did she have to lose? She was already sold. "Nora Hayes," he said. It wasn't a question. Mr. Costa, I overheard your father, Arthur said, leaning back as his drink arrived. He took it, wrapping his large hands around the glass. He's practically giving you away, $3 million to clear his debt to Carmine. He was pitching you to Benny the Rat for 1.5. Said you were Barren. He didn't soften the word. He dropped it on the table like a brick. Inhospitable, Nora corrected dryly. If we're being medically accurate. The corner of Arthur's mouth twitched. A micro-expression, almost a smile, but it died before it reached his eyes. You're not crying. Most women in your position would be crying. Tears won't pay the Romanos. He drank half his bourbon in one swallow. No, they won't. I'll pay the Romanos. Nora froze. Her fingers tightened around her glass of water. Why? Because I need a wife, Arthur said, flatly. And I don't need any more kids. He didn't say it with affection. He said it like a man assessing a structural beam for a new warehouse. I have 4 children, he continued, staring at his glass. My wife is dead. Since she passed, my house has become a goddamn war zone. I've hired 12 nannies in 3 years. They all quit, usually in tears. The ones who don't quit try to slip into my bed to secure a permanent bag. I don't want a lover. I don't want someone trying to give me a new heir to rival my firstborn. He looked up, his dark eyes locking onto hers. The intensity was suffocating. I want a legally bound caretaker, Arthur said. Someone who can't get pregnant. Someone who can't leverage a child against me. You are a closed circuit, Nora. You're exactly what I need. You want a glorified babysitter, Nora said. I want a mother for my kids. The title of wife is just to ensure you don't quit when they make you miserable. And they will make you miserable. He wasn't selling her a dream. He was offering her a job, a brutal, thankless job. But as Nora looked at him, she realized he was the safest man in the room. He didn't want to hurt her. He didn't want to use her body. He just wanted order in his home. 3 million, Nora said. 3.5, Arthur corrected. $500,000 for your father to walk away and never contact you again. You belong to the Costa family now. He didn't wait for her answer. He stood up, dropped a $100 bill on the table for a $20 drink, and looked down at her. Get your coat, Nora stood. She didn't look for Richard or Diane. She didn't say goodbye. Arthur walked through the crowd, and the sea of violent men parted for him like Moses at the Red Sea. She followed in his wake. The winter air hit her like a slap when they stepped outside. A black SUV was idling at the curb. The driver stepped out and opened the door. Arthur gestured for her to get in. She climbed into the back seat. It smelled of rich leather, peppermint, and gunpowder. Arthur slid in beside her. We get married on paper tomorrow morning, he said, as the car pulled into the Chicago traffic. No ceremony, no dress. You move in tonight. And your children? Nora asked, looking out the window at the blurring city lights. Do they know they're getting a stepmother tonight? Arthur rubbed his temples, a deep sigh escaping his chest. No, but they're about to find out. The Costa estate wasn't a home. It was a fortress. Wrought iron gates swung open to reveal a massive stone manor surrounded by high walls and security cameras. Armed guards stood by the portico, their breath pluming in the freezing air. When Arthur opened the front door, the sheer volume of the noise inside hit Nora like a physical blow. It sounded like a riot. Give it back, you little psycho! A teenage boy's voice roared from somewhere deep in the house. A loud smash followed, the sound of a priceless vase returning to the earth. Arthur closed his eyes for a long, agonizing second. He didn't look angry. He looked defeated. He shrugged off his overcoat, handed it to a pale, terrified-looking maid, and walked toward the noise. Nora followed, her heels clicking against the marble floor. They entered a massive vaulted living room. It looked like a tornado had touched down. Cushions were ripped open, feathers drifting through the air like snow. Books were scattered. And in the center of the chaos stood the Costa heirs, a boy of about 14, tall, gangly, his fists clenched, was screaming at a girl a few years younger. The girl, maybe 11, stood on top of a grand piano, holding a silver lighter dangerously close to a stack of sheet music. She had a cold, defiant smirk on her face. Running circles around the room, making engine noises at the top of his lungs, was a boy of 7. He was holding a very sharp, very real hunting knife, pretending it was an airplane. And then there was the youngest, a tiny girl, maybe 4, sitting under a heavy oak side table, her arms wrapped around her knees, staring blankly at the wall. "Leo!" Arthur barked. The word cracked like a whip. The teenager spun around. His eyes, dark like his father's, flashed with anger. "She took my watch, the one Mom gave me." "I didn't take it, you idiot," the girl on the piano sneered. "You lost it because you're disorganized." "Mia, get down from the piano and put the lighter away," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. Mia rolled her eyes, snapped the lighter shut, and hopped down. Arthur then reached out and snatched the hunting knife from the 7-year-old as he zoomed past. "Sam, go to your room." "No!" Sam screamed, dropping to the floor and going boneless, kicking his feet against the rug. Arthur ignored the tantrum. He looked at the 3 older children who were now staring at Nora. Their eyes were feral. They were mourning, traumatized animals who had learned that acting out kept the pain at bay and drove strangers away. "Line up," Arthur commanded. Reluctantly, Leo, Mia, and a still-kicking Sam formed a sloppy line. "This is Nora," Arthur said. "She is my wife. She is your mother now. You will treat her with the exact same respect you treat me. If I hear she has been disrespected, you will answer to me." Leo laughed, a bitter, ugly sound. "A wife? You just bought a new nanny. How long is this one gonna last? A week?" "I don't know, Leo," Nora spoke for the first time. Her voice was calm, cutting through the residual tension in the room. She stepped forward, stepping over a pile of feathers. "I have a very high tolerance for bullshit." Leo blinked. Mia raised an eyebrow. Sam stopped kicking. "I'm not your nanny," Nora said, looking at each of them. "I'm not here to make you eat your vegetables or coddle you when you throw tantrums. I don't care if you break the furniture. It's your father's money. But if you come at me or try to run me out, you'll find I'm much harder to get rid of than the women you're used to." Nora turned to the 4-year-old still sitting under the table. She hadn't moved. She hadn't blinked. Nora crouched down slowly, resting her elbows on her knees, making herself smaller. She didn't reach for her. She just looked at her. Her eyes were wide, a startling pale blue. "Lily hasn't spoken since the explosion," Arthur said quietly from behind her. Nora nodded. She didn't offer a sad smile. She didn't coo at her. She reached into her purse, pulled out a small foil-wrapped chocolate she had taken from the lounge at the clinic earlier that day and slid it across the floor. It stopped right at the toe of her tiny shoe. Nora stood back up and looked at Arthur. "Where is my room?" Arthur stared at her, something shifting in his dark eyes. For the first time all night, he didn't look completely exhausted. He looked intrigued. "Second floor, end of the hall, left side," he said. Nora turned to the kids. "Good night. I'll see you at breakfast. 7 a.m. If you're late, make your own food." Nora walked out of the room, leaving the heirs of the Costa Empire in stunned silence. She had nowhere to go, no family to return to, and no hope for a normal life. But as she climbed the grand staircase of her new prison, she felt a strange, unfamiliar spark in her chest. Purpose. She finally had a purpose. They were broken, just like her, and they were going to have to figure out how to survive each other. The Costa kitchen was a masterpiece of Italian marble and brushed steel. It was also, at 6:45, the next morning, completely empty. The staff, Nora had learned from a hastily scrawled note left on the island, didn't arrive until 8. The previous nannies had cooked, or ordered in, or simply hidden in their rooms while the children scavenged. Nora tied an apron over her slacks and started pulling pans from the racks. She didn't make pancakes shaped like smiley faces. She didn't bake fresh muffins. She cracked 12 eggs into a glass bowl, whisked them violently, and threw bacon onto a hot skillet. The smell of rendered fat and black coffee filled the cavernous space. At precisely 7 a.m., the swinging door pushed open. Leo walked in first. He wore his school uniform, a navy blazer and gray trousers, like a prison jumpsuit. His tie was loose. He looked at the plates of eggs and bacon set at the island, then looked at Nora. "I don't eat eggs," he said. "Then you'll be hungry," Nora replied, not looking up from the sink where she was washing the skillet. Mia entered next. She had a tablet in her hand, her eyes glued to the screen. She sat down, picked up a fork, and poked the eggs as if expecting them to detonate. Sam barreled in a moment later, still in his pajamas, holding a plastic dinosaur. He climbed onto a stool and immediately shoved a handful of bacon into his mouth. Lily trailed behind them all. She hovered near the doorframe, a tiny ghost in a pink nightgown. Nora poured a small glass of orange juice and set it at an empty stool. She didn't call to her. She just walked to the coffee machine. Out of the corner of her eye, she watched Lily shuffle forward, climb onto the stool, and wrap her small hands around the glass. For 3 minutes, the only sound was the clinking of forks. It was a fragile piece. Sam broke it. He didn't like the texture of his eggs. Instead of saying so, he picked up his plate and tipped it forward. The yellow scramble slid off the ceramic and hit the marble island with a wet splat. Leo smirked. Mia didn't look up, but the corner of her mouth twitched. They were waiting. They were waiting for Nora to yell, to threaten to tell their father, or to sigh in exasperation and clean it up while muttering under her breath. Nora turned around, leaning her hips against the counter. She looked at the eggs on the counter. Then she looked at Sam. "Are you finished?" she asked. Sam puffed out his chest. "It's gross. Make me a waffle." Nora walked over to him. She didn't raise a hand. She didn't raise her voice. She simply picked up his empty plate, grabbed the glass of juice he hadn't finished, and dumped the liquid over the scrambled eggs on the counter. "Breakfast is over," Nora said calmly. "Go get dressed for school." Sam's eyes widened. The defiance vanished, replaced by sheer, unadulterated outrage. "I'm hungry. I want a waffle." "You had breakfast. You put it on the counter," Nora said. "The kitchen is closed until lunch. If you're hungry, you can eat the eggs off the marble, but you'll have to beat the cleaning staff to it." "You can't do that," Sam shrieked, his face turning red. "I'm telling my dad." "Go ahead," Nora said, pointing toward the hallway. "His office is down the hall. Let's see if he interrupts his morning calls to make you a waffle because you threw your food like a feral animal." Sam stared at her, his chest heaving. He looked at Leo for backup. Leo shifted uncomfortably. He was used to screaming matches. He wasn't used to a brick wall. "You're crazy," Leo muttered. "No, Leo, I'm just not afraid of you," Nora said, meeting his dark eyes. "None of you. You want to act like monsters to scare people away? Fine, but I'm not going anywhere. I have nowhere else to go. So, you can either learn to eat your breakfast, or you can starve until you figure out how to act like humans." "You're just a whore my dad bought," Mia said casually, not looking up from her tablet. The word hung in the air. A calculated strike from an 11-year-old sniper. Nora walked over to Mia. She didn't snatch the tablet. She reached forward and pressed the power button on the top edge. The screen went black. Mia finally looked up, her blue eyes blazing with sudden fury. "I'm a heavily discounted asset," Nora corrected her, her voice perfectly level. "He got me on clearance because I can't have babies, but he still paid $3.5 million for me, Mia. Which means I technically outrank everything in this house, including that tablet." She tapped the dark screen with her fingernail. "Eat your bacon." Mia stared at her, her mouth slightly open. For the first time, she had no comeback. From the doorway, a slow single clap echoed in the silence. Nora turned. Arthur was standing there, dressed in a black suit, his tie perfectly knotted. A leather briefcase hung from one hand. He looked at the eggs on the counter, then at Sam's shocked face, and finally at Nora. "7:15, Arthur said, his voice gravelly from sleep and cigarettes. "And the house isn't on fire." "Give it time," Nora said. "Sam is still deciding if he wants to weaponize the toaster." Arthur's eyes lingered on her for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. There was a dangerous kind of curiosity in his gaze. He didn't intervene. He didn't coddle Sam or reprimand Mia. He just walked to the coffee pot, poured himself a mug, and walked out. The message to the children was clear. You are on your own. At noon, a black town car took Nora to a municipal building in downtown Chicago. Arthur was already there, standing in a sterile, fluorescent-lit hallway outside a judge's chambers. His lawyer, a balding man with a nervous sweat, held the thick manila folder. There was no white dress. Nora wore a tailored gray suit. Arthur didn't offer her a bouquet. He handed her a heavy, gold-nibbed fountain pen. They sat across from a bored judge who stamped the documents with the enthusiasm of a toll booth operator. They signed their names. Nora Hayes became Nora Costa. "The transfer to your father's accounts is cleared," Arthur said as they walked out of the building. The winter wind whipped down the concrete canyon of the street, biting at her cheeks. "Your debt to the Romanos is nullified." "Thank you," Nora said. She felt nothing. No joy, no sorrow. Just a clean, empty ledger. "I have business at the docks. I won't be home until late," Arthur said, pausing by the door of her waiting car. "The kids get home at 3. There's a security detail. 2 men on the gates, 2 on the perimeter. Don't let them go outside." He didn't kiss her cheek. He didn't even shake her hand. He just turned and got into his own SUV. They were business partners in a very strange, very quiet firm. Nora went back to the fortress. She spent the afternoon familiarizing herself with the layout. The panic room in the basement, the reinforced glass on the ground floor windows, the blind spots in the hallway cameras. You don't grow up in a syndicate family without learning how to assess a kill box. At 3 o'clock, the kids arrived. The silent war resumed. Leo locked himself in his room, blasting heavy metal music so loud the floorboards vibrated. Mia camped in the library, ignoring Nora's existence. Sam broke a lamp in the den. Lily sat under the piano. Nora didn't yell. She swept up the glass from the lamp and deducted the cost from Sam's allowance on a ledger she pinned to the fridge. She let Leo's music play. She left a sandwich on a plate near Lily. It was 6 p.m. when the house shifted. It wasn't a sound. It was an absence of sound. The faint, rhythmic crunch of the perimeter guards walking the gravel paths outside had stopped. Nora was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for a dinner she knew they would complain about. She froze, the chef's knife hovering over a red bell pepper. She set the knife down. She walked to the kitchen window and looked at the security monitor mounted on the wall. Camera 4, the back gate, was static. Camera 2, the east wall, showed a guard lying flat on his back in the snow, unmoving. A cold spike of adrenaline drove straight into her heart. "We're breached," Nora didn't scream. "Panic is a luxury you can't afford when men with guns are coming for you." She moved fast. She ran to the den. Sam was on the floor, playing with a train set. She grabbed him by the back of his shirt and hauled him up. "Hey!" he yelled. "Not a word, Sam. Not a single sound," Nora hissed, her voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly whisper that made his eyes widen. She dragged him to the library. Mia looked up from her book, ready to snap an insult. "Get up," Nora ordered. "Now, go to the basement stairs. Move." "Why should I?" "Because there are dead men on the lawn, Mia, and if you don't move right now, you'll join them." The blood drained from her face. She dropped the book and ran. Nora found Lily still under the piano. She didn't coax her. She scooped her up. She weighed nothing. Nora held her against her chest and ran for the stairs. "Leo!" Nora shouted as she hit the second-floor landing. His music was still blaring. She kicked his door open. The wood splintered around the lock. Leo jumped off his bed, yanking his headphones down. "What the hell is wrong with you?" "House is breached. Basement. Now." He didn't argue. He had grown up in this life too. He recognized the tone. Nora shoved him ahead of her down the stairs. They hit the main floor, just as the sound of shattering glass erupted from the dining room. Heavy boots hit the hardwood. "Go, go, go!" Nora shoved Leo toward the basement door where Mia and Sam were huddled, shaking. Nora pulled her father's snub-nosed .38 from the small of her back, a wedding gift she had kept from her old life, tucked into her waistband since she got home. She didn't point it blindly. She held it close to her chest, covering the children as they scrambled down the dark stairs. She backed in after them and slammed the heavy, steel-reinforced basement door shut, throwing the 3 deadbolts. They ran to the panic room at the back of the cellar, a solid steel vault. They got inside, locked it down, and Nora finally let out a breath. The kids were terrified. Sam was crying silently, tears streaking his dirty cheeks. Mia was holding her knees. Leo was pacing, his fists clenched, trying to look brave but failing. Lily just buried her face in Nora's neck. Nora sat down on the floor in the center of the steel room. She kept the gun in her lap. "Sit down, Leo," she said quietly. "They're going to get in," he stammered, pointing at the steel door. "They blew up my mom's car. They can blow that door." "They don't want you," Nora said, her voice steady, projecting a certainty she didn't entirely feel. "They want your father. If they wanted you, they would have hit the school. This is a message, and messages are best delivered quickly before the cops arrive." "You don't know that," Leo yelled, his voice cracking. "I know that because my father owed $3 million to men who chop fingers off for sport," Nora said, looking him dead in the eye. "I know how the wolves hunt, Leo, and they don't waste C4 on a basement door unless the king is inside." He stopped pacing. He looked at the gun in her lap. He looked at how her hands weren't shaking. They sat in the dark for 45 minutes. Then the heavy thud of footsteps echoed outside the vault. A fist pounded on the steel. "Nora!" It was Arthur. His voice was raw, stripped of its usual icy control. It sounded like a man who'd just run through hell. Nora stood up, walked to the door, and disengaged the locks. She swung it open. Arthur stood there, breathing heavily. His knuckles were split and bleeding. There was a smear of soot on his jaw. 3 heavily armed syndicate men stood behind him, sweeping the basement with rifles. Arthur looked at Nora, taking in the gun in her hand. Then he looked past her to the 4 children sitting safely on the floor of the vault. Not a scratch on them. He stepped into the vault, closing the distance between them. He didn't look at the kids yet. He looked at Nora. His chest heaved against his ruined suit jacket. "How did you know?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Camera 2 went dark. The guard's patrol rhythm broke," Nora answered, lowering the hammer on the .38 and clicking the safety on. "I got them down here before they breached the ground floor." Arthur stared at Nora. He wasn't looking at a barren woman or a discounted asset or a glorified babysitter. He was looking at a soldier who had held the line. He reached out. She thought he was going to take the gun. Instead, his large, bloodied hand cupped the back of her neck. His grip was firm, warm, and desperate. He pulled her forward, pressing his forehead against hers for one heavy, grounding second. "Thank you," he breathed against her skin. He let go before she could process the heat of his touch, turning to his children. He dropped to his knees, pulling all 4 of them into a desperate embrace. Nora stepped out of the vault, leaning against the cold concrete wall of the basement. She watched the ruthless monster of the Northern Syndicates bury his face in his son's shoulder. She had been sold to a nightmare. But for the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The cleanup took 2 days. The syndicate operates with brutal efficiency. Blood was scrubbed from the hardwoods. The shattered dining room window was replaced with bulletproof glass, and the compromised guards were removed. They didn't ask questions. The house smelled strongly of bleach and ozone. The dynamic had shifted. It wasn't a sudden, magical transformation into a happy family. Sam still threw tantrums, and Mia still wielded sarcasm like a scalpel. But the edge of cruelty was gone. When Nora told them to sit for dinner, they sat. When she told them to go to bed, they went. Fear had forged a strange, fragile respect between them. But Leo was different. The oldest Costa heir was vibrating with a new, dark energy. Since the attack, he hadn't slept. Nora could hear him pacing in the room above hers at 2 a.m. He was angry at his helplessness. He was a 14-year-old boy in a world that demanded he be a man, and he was failing. And she knew exactly what was eating at him. The morning of the third day, after Arthur left for a sit-down with the families to address the breach, Nora went to Sam's room. Sam was at school. His room was a chaotic mess of Lego bricks and comic books. Nora didn't bother with the closet. She went straight for the heating vent under the window. Children who grow up in unpredictable environments always have a stash, a place to hoard things they can control. She had one when she was his age, a hollowed-out dictionary where she kept stolen candy and spare cash. Nora used a butter knife to unscrew the vent cover. She reached her arm into the dusty, metallic throat of the duct. Her fingers brushed against a velvet pouch. She pulled it out. Inside was a collection of shiny, useless treasures. A brass button, a broken laser pointer, $3 silver, and a heavy men's Rolex Daytona. It was scratched. The crystal face had a spiderweb crack across the dial, likely from when Sam had dropped it, prompting him to hide the evidence and blame Mia. Nora pocketed the watch and screwed the vent back into place. She called a cab. She didn't use the family drivers. She went to a small, heavily fortified jeweler in the Diamond District. An old Russian named Yuri, who owed her father a favor, and by extension, owed her. "I need the crystal replaced," Nora told Yuri, sliding the Rolex across the velvet pad. "And the band polished. I need it in 2 hours." Yuri looked at the watch, then at her. "This is Costa's watch, the old man's." "It's Leo's now," Nora said. 2 hours, Yuri." Nora sat in the shop and waited, drinking terrible instant coffee from a styrofoam cup. When Yuri handed it back, it looked pristine. The silver gleamed. The face was flawless. She paid him in cash and went back to the fortress. When Leo got home from school, he didn't slam the front door. He walked in quietly, his shoulders slumped. He started to walk past the kitchen. "Leo," Nora called out. He stopped, turning slowly. "Yeah?" Nora walked out of the kitchen. She didn't give him a lecture about brotherhood or stealing. She just held out her hand. The Rolex dangled from her fingers, catching the afternoon light. Leo stopped breathing. His eyes locked onto the watch. He reached out slowly, tentatively, as if expecting it to vanish. When his fingers brushed the cold metal, he snatched it, pulling it to his chest. He looked at the pristine crystal. Then he looked at Nora. His defensive armor, the thick, cynical shell he had built since his mother died, cracked straight down the middle. "How?" he croaked. "Sam's heating vent," Nora said simply. "He likes shiny things. He panicked when he cracked it. I got it fixed." Leo's jaw trembled. He tried to lock it down. He bit the inside of his cheek, staring at the floor. "You think this makes us even? You think buying me off fixes everything?" "I don't think it fixes anything, Leo," Nora said softly, stepping closer to him. "And I'm not trying to buy you. I know this was your mother's gift to you before she died. I know it's the only thing of hers you carry." He looked up at her, a tear finally breaking free and cutting a hot path down his cheek. He wiped it away furiously with the back of his sleeve. "Why do you care?" he asked, his voice raw. "You don't know us. My dad bought you to be a warden. Why are you doing this?" "Because you're angry, Leo," Nora said. "And I know what it feels like to be so angry at the world that you want to burn your own house down just to feel the heat. You lost your mother. Your father checked out to fight a war, and you were left to hold the pieces." Nora reached out, placing her hand over his fists, which were clenched tightly around the watch. "I'm not your mother," Nora told him, her voice firm but anchored in a deep, painful truth. "I will never try to replace her. But you aren't fighting alone anymore. I am holding the pieces now. You can put the armor down." Leo stared at her. The boy who had sneered at her 3 days ago was gone. He let out a ragged, shuddering breath, and his shoulders finally dropped. He didn't hug her. He was still a mafia prince, too proud for that. But he nodded. One sharp, decisive nod. He strapped the watch to his wrist and walked up the stairs. The heavy, oppressive energy he had been carrying was gone. That night, after the house was silent and the children were asleep, Nora sat in the library reading a book. The fire was dying in the hearth, casting long, dancing shadows across the leather-bound spines. The heavy oak doors pushed open. Arthur walked in. He had taken off his jacket and tie. His sleeves were rolled up, exposing the dark ink of syndicate tattoos winding up his forearms. He held 2 crystal tumblers and a bottle of 20-year-old Macallan. He walked over to the leather sofa opposite her chair and sat down. He poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into each glass and held one out to her. Nora marked her page and took the glass. "Long day? The Romanos are pushing our borders in the south," Arthur said, staring into his glass. "It's handled, but it's tedious." He took a sip. Nora took a sip. The scotch burned beautifully down her throat. "Leo came to my office before bed," Arthur said, his voice low, filling the quiet room. "He showed me the watch." Nora didn't say anything. She just waited. "He told me what you said to him," Arthur continued, finally looking up. His dark eyes were unreadable, yet intensely focused. "He said you told him you were holding the pieces now." "Someone has to," Nora said, plainly. Arthur leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He looked tired. Yes, but there was something else underneath the exhaustion now. A quiet awe. "I bought a sterile woman to act as a placeholder," Arthur murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips before rising to meet her eyes. "I thought I was buying a lock for the door. I didn't realize I was buying the foundation." He stood up. He didn't make a move toward her. He didn't try to touch her. He respected the boundary they had set on day 1. But the air between them had fundamentally changed. It wasn't cold anymore. It was charged. "Good night, Nora," Arthur said. "Good night, Arthur." Nora watched him walk out of the library, the heavy doors closing softly behind him. She looked down at the amber liquid in her glass. For a woman who was supposed to be barren, she was suddenly growing a lot of roots. The bulletproof windows of the Costa estate distorted the Chicago rain, turning the downpour into a blurred gray smear against the glass. It had been raining for 3 days. Inside, the enforced confinement was breeding a quiet, claustrophobic tension. Nora found Mia in the library. She was sitting cross-legged on the Persian rug, surrounded by colored pencils and heavy sheets of cardstock. She was stabbing a dark green pencil into the paper with a rhythmic, furious intensity. The tip snapped. She threw the pencil across the room. It bounced off a mahogany bookshelf with a sharp crack. Nora walked in and picked up the broken pencil. She didn't offer a motherly smile. She pulled a small metal sharpener from the desk drawer, shaved the wood back to a lethal point, and handed it to her. "Math or history?" Nora asked, sitting in the leather wingback chair adjacent to her. Mia glared at her, her blue eyes ringed with exhaustion. Social studies. We have to draw a family tree. Ah, a landmine. Nora leaned forward, looking at the cardstock. She had drawn a thick, brown trunk. At the top, there were branches, but they were jagged and empty. Down near the bottom, she had written Leo, Mia, Sam, Lily in a sharp, cramped script. Beside Arthur's name, there was a blank space, a gaping hole where a mother was supposed to be. Mrs. Gable says it has to be complete, Mia muttered, her voice thick with a resentment that masked deep pain. She said we have to trace the bloodlines. She knows about my mom. Everyone at that stupid private school knows my mom got blown up. She's just trying to make me look like a freak. Mrs. Gable sounds like a woman who doesn't understand the realities of survival, Nora said evenly. Mia paused, looking up at her. She's a bitch. That too. Nora pointed at the blank space next to Arthur's name. So, put your mother's name there. Draw a line to the four of you. She gave you life. That earns the ink. And you? Mia's voice was a challenge. A sniper waiting for the target to step into the crosshairs. Where do you go? You're legally his wife. But you're not blood. You can't even have kids. You're just here. I am just here, Nora agreed, her voice perfectly steady. She didn't let the barb about her barrenness sting. She had weaponized that truth long before Mia tried to use it. I am not your blood. I didn't give you your eyes, or your temper, or your stubbornness. Your mother did that. Nora leaned down, taking the dark green pencil from her hand. She moved to the base of the tree she had drawn, below the grass line. A family tree is just a diagram of biology, Mia. It's fragile. The wind can snap a branch. Lightning can split the trunk. Nora pressed the pencil into the paper, drawing thick, interlocking lines deep beneath the soil. But a family isn't just branches, it's the roots. The roots hold the tree in the ground when the storm hits. They find the water. They take the impact. Nora handed the pencil back to her. Put your mother in the branches. She's your sky, Nora told her. Put me in the dirt. I'm the roots. I'm here to hold the ground so you don't fall over. Mia stared at the thick, tangled roots Nora had drawn at the bottom of her page. Her throat worked. She swallowed hard, her jaw tight. She didn't cry. Costas didn't cry. But she picked up the pencil, and in a tiny, meticulous script, she wrote Nora right in the center of the root system. She didn't say thank you. Nora didn't need her to. Nora stood up and left her to finish her work. Nora walked into the parlor. The grand piano sat in the corner, a massive black beast that hadn't been played since Arthur's wife died. Lily was sitting under it. She was always under it. It was her bunker. Nora didn't try to coax her out. She simply sat down on the bench. Nora wasn't a maestro, but her father used to make her take lessons so she could look cultured for her future husband. She hated the classical pieces, but she loved jazz. It was messy, unpredictable, and full of half-steps that sounded wrong until they resolved into something right. Nora lifted the fallboard. The keys were dusty. She pressed middle C. The note rang out, clear and mournful in the quiet room. She started playing a slow, melancholy version of a blues progression. She didn't look under the piano. She kept her eyes on the keys, letting the rhythm steady her own racing thoughts. Her new life was a high-wire act over a pit of vipers. This house was a sanctuary, but it was also a target. Nora felt a small, warm weight press against her left thigh. She didn't stop playing. She shifted her gaze slightly. Lily had crawled out from under the piano. She was standing beside the bench, her chin barely reaching the keys. She watched Nora's fingers move. Nora slowed the tempo, leaving spaces between the chords, empty air for her to fill. Lily reached up with one tiny pale finger. She pressed a white key near the top of the board. A high, bright ping. Nora adjusted her progression to match her note. They played a discordant, strange little duet, the broken woman and the silent child. "Loud," a tiny, raspy voice whispered. Nora's hands froze. The silence that followed was deafening. She looked down. Lily was staring at the keys, her brow furrowed in concentration. It was the first word she had spoken in 3 years. "Yes," Nora breathed, her voice barely audible. "It's loud, but it's better than quiet, isn't it?" Lily looked up at her with those startling blue eyes. She gave a single, microscopic nod. Then she climbed up onto the bench, pressing her small side firmly against Nora's hip, and waited for her to start playing again. From the doorway, a shadow shifted. Arthur was standing there. His jacket was slung over his shoulder, his tie pulled loose. Nora didn't know how long he had been watching, but the look in his eyes wasn't exhaustion anymore. It was something infinitely more dangerous. It was reverence. The invitation was embossed in silver foil on thick black vellum. It sat on the kitchen island like a coiled snake. The annual Chicago Syndicate Gala. It was neutral ground. A mandatory gathering of the 5 families to show unity to the outside world, while quietly brokering power in the shadows. To decline was a sign of weakness. To go was to walk into a shark tank covered in blood. Arthur walked into the kitchen, buttoning the cuffs of a fresh white shirt. He looked at the invitation, then at Nora. She was pouring coffee into a thermos for Leo's soccer practice. "You don't have to go," Arthur said, his voice a low rumble. "I can say you're ill. And let the Romanos whisper that the great Arthur Costa bought a defective wife who's too ashamed to show her face." Nora twisted the cap onto the thermos. "I'll go." "Your parents will be there," he warned. "Richard is desperate. He's been trying to leverage his new connection to me through our marriage. I cut his credit lines yesterday. He won't be happy. Richard Hayes ceased being my father the night he put a price tag on me in the Continental," Nora said coldly. "What time do we leave?" 8. At 7:45, Nora walked down the grand staircase. She didn't wear a submissive pastel or a modest gown. She wore black silk. It clung to her frame, the back plunging low, the fabric sweeping the marble floor like liquid shadow. Her hair was pinned up in a severe twist. She wore no jewelry, save for the plain platinum band on her left ring finger. Arthur was waiting in the foyer. He was a force of nature in a custom tuxedo. When he saw her, he stopped breathing for a fraction of a second. His gaze swept over her, heavy and possessive, setting fire to nerve endings she didn't know she had. He didn't offer a polite compliment. He stepped into her space, his knuckles brushing the bare skin of her shoulder as he helped her into her faux fur coat. "You look like a war," he murmured against her ear, his breath hot against her skin. "Then let's go start one," Nora replied. The ballroom of the Drake Hotel was a masterclass in opulent decay. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over a room filled with politicians on the take, judges with gambling debts, and men who killed for a living eating caviar. The moment Arthur and Nora walked in, the temperature of the room shifted. Eyes darted toward them. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through dry grass. They wove through the tables. Arthur kept his hand on the small of her back. It wasn't a protective gesture. It was a brand. Mine. They hadn't been there 20 minutes before the rats came out of the walls. Arthur, Nora. Nora turned. Her father, Richard, stood there. He looked 10 years older than he had a month ago. His tuxedo lapels looked slightly frayed, the confident swagger replaced by the jittery energy of a cornered man. Beside him stood Benny the rat, the loan shark Arthur had thrown out of her booth the night she was sold. Benny was grinning. He had a glass of champagne in his hand and the reckless courage of a man who thought he had the upper hand in a crowded room. "Richard," Arthur said, his voice flat. He didn't acknowledge Benny. "Arthur, my boy," Richard started, sweating. "I was hoping we could discuss the shipping routes on the south side. Since we're family now." "We aren't family, Richard," Arthur cut him off. "We executed a transaction. You were paid. Do not approach me in public again." Richard's face flushed a deep, ugly red. He opened his mouth, but Benny stepped forward, his garlic breath cutting through the scent of expensive perfume in the air. "Cold, Costa," Benny sneered. "But I guess you get what you pay for, a discount wife." "Tell me, Arthur, is she good for anything besides balancing a checkbook? Because she sure as hell can't give you a bloodline. The Hayes girl is a dry well." The music in the ballroom seemed to stop. The surrounding tables fell dead silent. Syndicate men thrived on disrespect. They were waiting to see if Arthur would draw a weapon or lose his temper. Arthur's hand dropped from Nora's back. His shoulders squared. The violence radiating from him was a physical pressure in the room. He was going to kill Benny right there on the parquet floor. Nora stepped forward, putting herself between Arthur and Benny. She didn't yell. She didn't slap him. She simply picked up a crystal flute of champagne from a passing waiter's tray, took a slow, elegant sip, and looked Benny dead in the eye. "It's true, Benny," Nora said, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet room. "I am barren. I will never harbor a child in my womb. But biology is cheap. Any street rat can breed." She looked him up and down. Case in point. A few stifled laughs echoed from the surrounding men. Benny's sneer faltered. "I don't need to give birth to a bloodline," Nora continued, her voice dropping to a silken, lethal whisper. "Because I am currently raising 4 of the most dangerous heirs this city has ever seen. Leo Costa will command the North before he's 20. Mia will bankrupt your miserable operations before she graduates high school. I am the mother of the Costa Empire now. And if you ever speak to my husband or breathe my name again, I won't ask Arthur to kill you. I will let my children do it for practice." Nora didn't wait for a response. She turned her back on him. She looked at her father, who was staring at her in sheer terror. "Goodbye, Richard," Nora said. She placed the half-empty champagne glass into Benny's limp hand. She turned to Arthur. His dark eyes were blazing, a terrifying, magnificent inferno of pride and lust. "Take me home," Nora told him. Arthur didn't say a word. He placed his hand back on her waist, gripped her tight enough to bruise, and walked her out of the ballroom. Nobody moved to stop them. The sea parted. The ride back to the estate was suffocatingly silent. The partition was up. The only sound was the low hum of the SUV's tires on the wet pavement. Arthur sat close to Nora. too close. The heat coming off his body was immense. He was vibrating with a primal, barely contained energy. Every time the streetlights washed over the interior of the car, she could see his jaw working, his eyes fixed intensely on her profile. When the car pulled up to the portico, Arthur didn't wait for the driver to open the door. He kicked it open himself, pulling Nora by the hand out into the freezing night air. They walked through the heavy oak doors. The house was dead quiet. The security detail was outside. The children were asleep upstairs. Nora started to walk toward the staircase, aiming for her bedroom at the end of the hall. Arthur caught her wrist. He spun her around. He didn't ask permission. He crowded her against the heavy mahogany wall of the foyer, pinning her with his body. His hands slammed flat against the wood on either side of her head, trapping her. "Arthur!" Nora gasped, the air leaving her lungs. He leaned down, his nose brushing hers. He smelled of rain, scotch, and gunpowder. "A street rat," Arthur whispered, quoting her insult to Benny. A low, dark chuckle vibrated in his chest. "You tore his throat out in front of the entire commission. You claimed my children as your own." "They are mine," Nora said fiercely, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I earned them. You bought my contract, but I earned my place in this house." "You did," he agreed, his voice turning ragged. His dark eyes dropped to her mouth. "You earned them. You held the line. You fixed my son's watch. You made my ghost of a daughter speak. You are the only thing holding this God-forsaken family together, Nora." He reached up, his rough fingers tracing the line of her jaw, sliding into the hair pinned at the nape of her neck. He pulled the silver pins out, one by one, letting her hair fall in a dark wave over her shoulders. "I bought a caretaker," Arthur murmured, his thumb brushing her bottom lip. "But that's not what I want anymore. I don't want a business partner. I don't want a placeholder." "What do you want, Arthur?" Nora challenged, her breath catching as his hand slid down her neck, his thumb resting heavily over her racing pulse. "I want my wife," he said. He didn't wait for her to answer. He crushed his mouth to hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was 3 years of repressed grief, rage, and loneliness pouring out of him. It was a man starving to death, finally finding a feast. Nora didn't push him away. She grabbed the lapels of his tuxedo jacket and pulled him closer, matching his desperation with her own. Nora had spent her entire life feeling broken, empty, a defective vessel that nobody wanted. But as Arthur's arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her off the marble floor and carrying her up the grand staircase, she didn't feel empty. She felt whole. She felt powerful. He kicked the door to his master suite shut behind them. The room was dark, save for the moonlight spilling across the massive bed. He set her on her feet. He didn't rush. He stripped away her armor, piece by piece. He unzipped the black silk dress, letting it fall in a pool at her feet. His eyes mapped every inch of her skin, not with the cold calculation of a buyer assessing a product, but with the reverence of a man discovering a religion. "You are not broken," Arthur swore, his voice fierce as he pressed his lips to the hollow of her throat. "You are perfect. Do you hear me? You are exactly what I need." Nora pulled his shirt over his shoulders, her hands mapping the heavy muscle and dark ink of his chest. There were scars, bullet grazes, and knife wounds. They were both damaged goods. two cracked vessels that had somehow found a way to hold water together. That night, there were no contracts, no debts, no syndicates or romanos or fathers selling their daughters. There was only the heat of the dark, the desperate tangle of limbs, and the quiet, profound surrender of two people who had finally stopped fighting the world and started fighting for each other. The next morning, the sun broke through the gray Chicago clouds for the first time in a week. Nora woke up to the smell of burnt toast and the sound of chaos. She sat up. The space beside her in the massive bed was empty, but the sheets were still warm. She slipped on a heavy silk robe and walked barefoot down the stairs, following the noise. She pushed open the kitchen doors. It was a disaster zone. Leo was aggressively scrubbing a pan in the sink, arguing loudly with Mia, who was attempting to program the coffee maker while scrolling on her phone. Sam was standing on a stool, violently shaking a box of cereal into a bowl, half of it missing and bouncing onto the marble floor. Arthur was standing in the center of it all. He was wearing gray sweatpants and a tight black t-shirt, his hair ruffled from sleep. He was holding a spatula like a weapon, looking utterly out of his depth as a cloud of smoke drifted from the toaster. Lily was sitting on the island counter, swinging her legs. They all froze when Nora walked in. The silence descended, thick and expectant. They were waiting to see which Nora they were going to get. The warden or the mother. Nora looked at the burnt toast. She looked at the cereal on the floor. She looked at Arthur, whose dark eyes were warm, anchoring her to the room. Nora walked over to the toaster, popped out the blackened bread, and tossed it into the bin. She picked up a broom and handed it to Sam. "Sweep," she ordered gently. Sam didn't throw a tantrum. He took the broom and started pushing the cereal around. Nora walked over to Lily. She rested her hand on her small back. "Good morning, Lily," Nora said. She looked up at her. Her pale blue eyes were bright. She smiled, a small, tentative curving of her lips. "Good morning, Mama," Lily said. The word dropped into the kitchen like a bomb. Leo stopped scrubbing. Mia dropped her phone. Arthur inhaled sharply, his gaze locking onto hers across the island. Nora's chest tightened. The hollow, empty space inside her, the barren wasteland that the doctors had condemned, that her parents had sold, suddenly felt full to the point of bursting. She didn't need to give birth to be a mother. Blood was just biology. Love was a choice. And they had chosen her. Nora looked up at Arthur. The ruthless monster of the North smiled at her. A real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Sit down," Nora told the Costa heirs, taking the spatula from her husband's hand. "I'll make the eggs." Did Nora's transformation from a discarded asset to the ruthless, beloved matriarch of the Costa Empire leave you speechless? Sometimes the families we choose are far stronger than the ones we are born into. If you loved this deep, emotional mafia romance drama and want more stories of strong women claiming their power and finding love in the darkest places, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this video with a friend who loves a fierce heroine, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible daily stories. Drop a comment below. What was your favorite moment?